A grandmother took her grandson to the beach on a beautiful summer day. And the waves were rolling in, and the grandson was having a marvelous time down by the water's edge building a sand castle, when suddenly a wave came up and swept the child out of the grandmother's sight. And she began to panic and cried out to God, "Oh God, what have you done? You must give my grandson back. Don't I go to church every Sunday? Don't I give my tithe in the offering plate? Don't I pray to you every day and sing songs of praise every week? I've raised my children to go to church, and God, I've tried to do everything that I could to live the way you want me to live. Oh God, please give my grandson back." She continued on and on and on, crying out to God with all the reasons why he should give her grandson back. And finally a voice from heaven said, "Oh, fine." And another big wave came up, and there was her grandson sitting on the beach as if nothing ever happened. And grandmother looked up to heaven and said, "He had a hat." Sometimes we're just not satisfied, are we? God is at work in our lives, in our homes, in our households, in our families, in our communities, and we still want more, and yet sometimes we forget how much He's already done. We get so busy in this life that we get distracted from who He is and what He's working on. We get turned aside into things that are less important. We settle for things that are good instead of great. And when Paul's writing to the Colossian church, he's challenging them to remember the source of their hope, what should be the center of their lives. He's challenging them to turn aside from their busyness and to remember again who Jesus is and what He has done. A simple idea. He just wants them to remember who He is and what He has done. And the reason He wants them to do that is because we've gotten distracted by what the gospel is. Gospel just means good news. It's the Greek word for good news. And we've started to think that the gospel is the good news about the church or about Christianity. We start to think the gospel is the good news about the good things we can do. We start to think that the gospel is about us. And a place where people can gather and be safe and be encouraged and share. But friends, the gospel, the good news, is about one thing only. It's about Jesus Christ. Who He is. And what He has done. That's all the gospel has ever been. When we ask the question, who is Jesus? We all ask that question ourselves, don't we? Who am I? Who am I? I'm a father. I'm a son, I'm a husband, I'm a brother. I'm a student. I'm a pastor. I'm a nephew. I'm a friend. I'm a student. I'm a pastor. I'm a student. I'm a pastor. Seems to be a recurring theme. I know who I am, but who is Jesus? Is the question Paul wants to answer. And so he starts in verse 15 by saying this. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. So who is Jesus? Well, He is God. We take that as a statement of faith, don't we? But what does it mean to be the image of the invisible God? How many people here looked in the mirror this morning? Raise your hand. Your hair all looks good. The Scriptures tell us that Jesus is the image of God. And we have a tendency to think of the word image as if it's a reflection in a mirror. Or a picture on a page. Or perhaps a person in a movie. We call that an image, don't we? But in the case of what Paul's saying here to the Colossian church, he's saying, no. The image is not just a copy. It's the manifestation of God. It's God actually showing up and being visible. It's, if you will, a transformation of appearance. But it's certainly not only a reflection. When we say He's the image of God, we are saying He's actually God. He shows us who God is, what God is like. And conversely, He shows us who we are supposed to be. by being the image of God. See, because Jesus is not only God, He's also a human being. We take that as truth as well, do we not? It tells us in John, chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, that in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. And later in John chapter 1, the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. Actually, the literal translation is the Word became flesh and pitched His tent in your midst. He came to camp. He came to live for a time among us. He came to be human so that we know who He really was. And the danger today, especially 2,000 years later, is we tend to make Jesus into an idea instead of a person. We tend to make Him into a philosophy. We say, well, I follow Jesus, and that means I live like this, don't we? The Gnostics and early group of Christians started to do that. They turned Jesus into a philosophy. And what they would do is they would say, well, this is what Jesus was like. And this is what we know about Him. And so now we can argue with other people about how to live because He's just another philosophy, just another choice in a world that's full of choices. Where the big motto of the society today is, well, we should have a choice, right? Everybody's choice is okay. We try to reduce Jesus to a choice, as if I could reduce my wife to a choice. Can I do that? No, I can't. She's my wife. I've covenanted till death do we part, right? Jesus Christ is a human being, a walking, talking, physical man. When you say, I follow Jesus, you're not following a philosophy. You're following a person. God in human form. He promised He would never leave us. He's the King of kings and Lord of lords. He's holy God and holy man. That's who Jesus is. But so what? What difference does that make? Well, that's when we ask, what has He done? Isn't that the question we ask as we get older? What have I done with my life? What have I done with my time? Sometimes each day you go, man, I didn't even know what I did today. It was busy, but I don't know what I was doing. You ever have days like that? It's just full. At the end of the day, you think, I didn't get anything done I wanted to do. Right? I have lots of days like that, it seems. You do a lot of good things, but you don't necessarily do what you want to do. Jesus set out to do some certain things, and He did them well. Verse 16, it tells us, by Him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through Him and for Him. He created all things is not a debate about creation and evolution. It's not a debate about how He created things. It's a reminder that He was the one that made it. What Jesus has done in relation to creation is He spoke and it began. He spoke and we came into existence. That's what God did in relation to creation. Further to that, verse 17, Paul goes on and he says, He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. If we really understand God and what He does, we understand this, that He is the force that science cannot define that holds it all together. Every time they discover a new thing, and they call it gravity, or they talk about these high-end things in physics. Ben's taking physics right now, and he blows my mind some of the stuff he's talking about, because I've never even heard of some of what they're discovering. But I know this, that God's the one ultimately that holds it all together, that keeps it all operational, that keeps it going. He sustains all things, and He will reconcile all things. Verse 20 tells us that through Him He will reconcile to Himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of the cross. We cannot reconcile ourselves to God. Every other religion, and sometimes, unfortunately, even the Christian religion tries to convince people if you just work hard enough or do the right things or have the right way, that, you know what, that'll be good and God will be pleased with you. Friends, there is nothing you can do. After 200 years almost of this church being in existence in St. Lawrence, every person that's come through these doors has discovered this to be true. There's nothing we can do. It's all the work of God on our behalf, Jesus Christ, reconciling us to Himself, bringing us to Him, and leaving us free to respond to what He's done. We need to remember the truth that in relation to creation, He created it all, He sustains it all, and He reconciles it all. What has He done in relation to us? Well, there's an uncomfortable truth here for some people that are down on church. Look at verse 18 with me. It says, He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything He might be preeminent. For in Him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. He is the head of the body of the church. What do we do with that? If He's the head, He's the one we're to follow. If He's the head, we're supposed to be attached to the body. Aren't we? I always wondered, when you go to a wedding like we did yesterday, many of us, and you see this beautiful bride and groom, and they're enjoying themselves and having a wonderful day, and they can't seem to stop smiling, those kind of days. I always wondered how it was possible for people to go to a wedding and hate the bride and love the groom. How do you do that with integrity and support that? How do you walk into a wedding and say, I'm going to go to your wedding because I love you, but I can't stand this guy you're marrying? How do you do that? I know some people try and do that. And they seem to get away with it, but it doesn't work very well, does it? Well, Scripture calls the church the bride of Christ. How can we claim to love Jesus, the head of the church, and hate His body, the church? Friends, when people tell you, I can love God and I don't need the church, they're wrong. Because Christ is the head of the church. It says Christ loved the church and He gave Himself for the church to create this thing. It's not a perfect place, let's be honest, right? When we say, what has Jesus done? He created this motley group of people that's sitting right here this morning. This was God's idea. Have you thought about that recently? When we're going through the debates about how things should work, or what we should do, or what programs we should run, or deciding where to sit because you don't want to be too close to this person or that person, think about this. This was God's idea, and Christ made it. He brought us together for a reason. And I don't know what part you are. I'm not sure what part I am. I may be a thumb or something, but I know thumbs are pretty useless on their own. Right? What did Christ do for us? Begin with, the first thing He did for us, according to Paul, is He created the church. This messed up, hypocritical place that people criticize all the time is God's idea. And I'm so glad for that. Anytime somebody says church are a bunch of hypocrites, just tell them there's room for one more. Right? He created the church. He also brought us to God. Verse 21, He goes on. You, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, He is now reconciled in His body of flesh by His death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before Him, before God. That's a mystery and a miracle to me. I know how imperfect I am, and yet, according to what Paul says, Jesus Christ, what He's done for me is He's made me holy and blameless. I like that. How often do we blame ourselves or blame other people? What Christ has done is cleansed us. He brought us to God. John the Baptist said the kingdom of God was coming, didn't he? Jesus Christ said it's at hand. And guess what? This right here is the kingdom of heaven. This thing called the church is God's kingdom here on earth. What are we doing as His kingdom? How are we serving Him? What are we using our gifts for? What Jesus has done is He's created all things, sustained all things, and reconciled all things. In relation to us, He created the church, He brought us to God, and He gave us hope. I don't know about you, but I'm finding hope in short supply these days. I look at the news, and I look at the situation even in our own community, how many people we've lost in this last year, and I think, boy, Lord, I need some hope. I need to know there's something I can count on, something I can depend on. This church, even as we go through transition, as we struggle, as we consider the future, we need hope. We need to know where our hope lies, and it lies in Jesus Christ alone. Verse 23, if you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel, the good news that you've heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven. That's the hope we have. that we continue to trust in Jesus Christ. That we stop being distracted by all the busyness. And friends, I don't think we can stop being busy anytime soon. Right? The reality of this world is we all have to work for a living. We all have responsibilities. Those of us with young families have to run them back and forth to town. That's just part of the deal. Right? And it seems like the longer that goes on, the busier we get. But in our busyness, we cannot forget who Jesus is and what He has done. I can tell you this. I've studied theology. I've studied for 7.5 years at university level in theology. I've studied history. I studied psychology. I was a landscaper for 10 years. I went to school for that as well. I've studied landscaping and how to grow trees and how to make plants healthy and how to do those things. I've studied statistics and sociology. And what I found as I went through all those studies is that none of them are the answer. Only Jesus is the answer. We owe Him everything. He created it all. He holds it all together. He created the church and invited us to be part of it. He is the answer to all things. Do you realize it's almost 200 years ago, in 2013, it will be 200 years since people began to meet in this community as the Baptist Church. You realize that? In just 2 short years, it will be 200 years. In 2019, it will be 200 years since the church formally became First St. Martin's Baptist Church. That they organized, that they got a constitution and a structure. Did you know that? Almost 200 years of Christian testimony have witnessed to this simple truth that Jesus Christ is the source of our hope. That He is the answer to all things. Isn't that amazing? Almost 200 years. And the question we need to ask when we reflect on 200 years is not whether we are present. We call the roll in a roll call service, and we ask the question, are you here? And people say, yeah, present. Good. That's good. That's a start. But the best question we can ask at the anniversary of the church, at the roll call of the church, is what comes next. Because the only reason to call the roll at school is to make sure you're here for the rest of the day, right? They don't call the roll at the end of the day, do they, Nancy? No. They call it the start of the day. Because the best is yet to come. Because there's more in front of us. Friends, I hope you realize there's more in front of us. We're about to start. I'm really excited tonight to come to the Alpha program and the launch party. You know why? Yes, because we're going to talk about who Jesus is and what He's done. But I'm just as excited because we actually had a conversation, and to get this, every church in our area is going to join together and do this together. Because we remember that we all have that one thing in common: Jesus Christ. So the Anglicans and the United and the Catholics and the Baptists, we're all going to be together to talk about who Jesus is and what He's done, and you don't want to miss that. Because, friends, it's a short time to gather on a Sunday night for a meal you're going to have anyway, and to spend time with people who are part of this thing called the church. But it's a time that's well spent, because the best is yet to come. Because Jesus Christ has shown us He's the source of all things, and He's not done yet. We need to do some things in response to who He is and what He's done. If you haven't yet done it, you need to put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. He will give you hope when hope is far away. But if you haven't put your hope in Jesus Christ, you need to make sure that He's part of your life each day. That instead of trying to add something more to your busy schedule, you make sure He's going with you when you go to hockey practice, or to work, or to visit, or whatever it is you're going to do. That you remember you take Him with you, because, friends, you are the church. We are the church. So walk across the room. Tell somebody else the good news. Invite them out to Alpha tonight. They might be surprised by what they get to share with us. And we have the opportunity to share good news. That Jesus Christ is the answer to all things. Would you pray?